We're picking back up on God Will Work With You, But Not For You, A Living Philosophy by Lau Russell. Chapter 18. Create Your Own Destiny. Every man's destiny is of his own making. He is either its master or it masters him. He who has knowledge and desire may steer his ship of life anywhere he will. But he who has little knowledge and desire is not even aware that he has a rudder with which to steer his ship of life. When you look out upon the sea of life, you will find that there are very few really great men, very many mediocre men, and countless thousands of men whose measure of knowledge and desire is very low. Why is this? Every man inherits all that God has to give. Nature does not deal unfairly or selectively with her gifts. The only difference between all men is a difference in desire. That one quality and nothing more. A man either desires to achieve or he does not desire to. He who deeply desires to achieve will gain the knowledge which he needs for achievement and the power to express that knowledge. Desire is always followed by willing effort. He who deeply desires anything loves the effort which he must exert to obtain his desire, but he whose desire is weak lacks incentive for effort and therefore makes none. Every man who has ever become great becomes so only because he desired to, planned to, and made the effort to become so. There are no accidentally great men. All great men build themselves in their own image. That which they become, they first desire to become. They thought out and planned every step upward to their own high mountain top. The great difference between all people lies not in their abilities, but in the difference of intensity of desire to express their abilities. It must be remembered that desire of mind is the sole source of universal energy. The greater the intensity of desire in the mind of any man, the great power he has to express his ability. It follows as a matter of course that his achievement is greater. Consider two men who desire to become great runners. Each has the same ability if both are normal at birth, but great desire gives a greater horsepower to the ability great desire gives a greater horsepower to ability than a lesser desire. The greater the desire, the greater the measure of love that goes into every effort in daily training. Lesser desire lessens the measure of effort. Drudgery and monotony then creep into ability instead of love, and the work toward achievement ceases long before the man of intense desire even thinks of tiring. Desire to become a runner and the effort of expressing that desire builds the body in the image of a runner, but the excellence of the body itself is dependent solely upon the measure of desire to make the body excellent for its purpose. Two men of different measures of desire therefore create more or less excellent body machines which are appropriate to the purpose of running. The difference is in desire only, not in ability. Demosthenes had less ability to become an orator than a man with a better speaking mechanism, but his desire overcame that. It was well known that he increased his difficulty of speaking by putting pebbles in his mouth to improve his voice mechanism through difficult exercise. I knew a fine pianist who had less physical ability than another fine pianist whose fingers were short and stubby in comparison with the other's long, slim fingers, but desire was so strong in him that the handicap in physical disability disappeared. To exemplify my meaning regarding the characteristic of nature to build one's body in the image of one's desire. One need only to realize that man who desires to be a runner becomes a runner with a runner's long, lithe, supple body. He does not become a pugilist, while a pugilist's stout, coarse, muscular body. With a pugilist's stout, coarse, muscular body. Had he commanded his body to become the body of a pugilist instead of a runner, it would have obeyed his command as implicitly as it obeyed his command to become a runner. This exemplifies the fact that every man has commanded over matter to the extent that his desire command it to give him the knowledge which enables him to command it. Everyone knows that Theodore Roosevelt had a very weak body in childhood, but the power of his intense desire to have a strong body gave him such command over the materials which constructed his body that he became a very strong, muscular man physically. As a child he had very little endurance. He so forcefully commanded his body to become like the image he had in his mind that it became like it. Desire followed by effort will always command growing bodies. My husband, who was an intimate friend of Theodore Roosevelt as well as being official painter of his children, told me that before Mr. Roosevelt became president, his greatest pleasure was in spending grueling hours on western cattle ranches, compelling his body to excel the work of every cowboy on the ranch. After he became president, his great pleasures were chopping down trees in the early morning and taking long rides, which called for great endurance. Often during those early days, he performed more than what the average man would call a good day's work before he actually began his regular day of work. Those who knew him well say that they never heard him say that he was tired. One of the greatest demonstrators of the power of mind to command matter is that the Gil Sonestein of Columbus, Ohio. This brave, spiritually illumined man has been completely paralyzed and blind for over 30 years, during which time he has been unable to move a single muscle. His nerve system is so far beyond capability of repair that he cannot command it to recovery, but he has commanded his body to survive so that he can manifest love to his fellow man through the only two functions left to him for creative expression, his hearing and his voice. This amazing man is so vital and happy, mentally and spiritually, that by writing he earns an income sufficient for him to maintain a staff of attendants who take care of his physical and secretarial needs. He has a host of friends and a great library of tape recordings of the memorable mental interchanges of their visits with him. I doubt if more than a few people who read his inspired writings know that he is utterly helpless physically, but so powerful mentally that he can command other bodies in his environment to give life to his creations by power of his mind alone. On one of my memorable visits to him, he said to me, "I would rather have my body and what I know about God than a perfect body of any man who does not know God as I do." These examples illustrate the power which your mind or mine has to command our bodies, to multiply our ability to fulfill physical demands of our destiny. We also have equal power of mind to control spiritual unfoldings of our destinies. No matter what you may desire to become in life, or whatever spiritual height you desire to ascend, you can attain that height if your desire is strong enough to be followed by the necessary actions which will elevate you to that height. No heights can ever be attained by wishful thinking or desire not followed by action. Whatever work you perform with deep desire, God will work with you by doing exactly as much for you as you do to manifest Him. The farmers or gardeners or foresters know this. They know that a little work given by them brings but little work done by nature. The giving and re-givings are always equal. The more service you give to nature, the more nature will work with you in her re-givings. Whatever destiny you plan for yourself, that destiny you can reach if your desire to reach it is strong enough. Desire alone is the controlling factor, not money, nor family, nor position. No one's influence can make you great. You alone control your own destiny. How many people utterly fail because of blaming other conditions and circumstances for their failures? A certain inventor, who has a wonderful idea, solicited capital from his friends for years to carry out his idea, then laid the blame for his failure upon his inability to raise capital. He wasted so much time trying to secure large capital instead of small capital to take one step at a time that he failed utterly. Thomas Edison, on the contrary, took one little step at a time to unfold the growth of his idea. His idea was a very big one, a very revolutionary one, yet he did not try to raise millions to finance it. He needed only a few dollars to take his first step. Every step after that took care of itself as it appeared. He always had enough money to make one step at a time. He had started by raising the millions which finally revolutionized the lighting industry. He would probably have failed as the inventor above quoted failed. His desire, persistence, and resourcefulness were worth more to him in unfolding his destiny than all the money in the world. How many thus give alibis for their failures? I cannot do it because I do not know anyone in Washington who will give me letters of introductions to higher-ups. One will say, another will say, I was unable to go to college, and blame his failure on that. Over and over again you will hear people say, he was lucky, everyone gave him a break. One such man said to the father of a famous motion picture star, how lucky your son is. Yes, he is lucky, the father replied, and the funny thing about it is that the harder he works, the luckier he is. Charles Goodyear transformed world transportation from the 5 miles an hour buggy days to the 70-mile-an-hour vulcanized rubber age. No one can ever attribute his success to luck. Every upward step of his progress was agonizing. One misfortune after another confronted him with which seemed to be... Oh dear. Starting that one over. One misfortune after another confronted him which seemed to be the end of his road. Once during his upward climb he was heralded as a great world benefactor. It was thought that he had succeeded in vulcanizing rubber, and fortunes were invested in making rubber overshoes for winter snows, and in fulfilling a huge government contract for rubber mailbags. These were highly successful during cold weather, but when warm weather came, they partially melted into a sticky condition, which rendered them utterly useless for their purpose except in winter. Perhaps no greater blow ever befell an inventor. It would have killed many other weaker men than Goodyear. Even though all financial support became impossible, he continued, although his closest friends deserted him. He became so poor that he had no money to bury his dead child. It is said that his wife and he had to bury it in the woods of Woburn, as no one in town would advance further money, and he would not accept charity. Later on, his wife was very ill at a time when he was making his last possible experiment with the last of his natural rubber supplies. He had broken his furniture to keep the fire going for his experiment, and to keep the room warm which was occupied by his sick wife. She suddenly called out to him in distress. Leaving his boiling pot, he rushed to her room, forgetting all about his kettle, while attending to her wants. Then came what seemed to be the final tragedy. The pot boiled over, and all of his last precious rubber went into the fire. Seizing a fork, but with little hope of saving it, he immediately recognized the unmistakable signs which he had been looking for all those years. That accident demonstrated that wet heat and boiling could not vulcanize. It needed the dry heat of fire. Perhaps there is no greater demonstration of the control of one's destiny by man himself than the life story of Charles Goodyear. Likewise, there is no better demonstration of the adulation one's friends and neighbors bestow upon neighbors after they are dead, whom they have ignored while alive, than the story of the people of Woburn who gathered together about 15 years ago to erect a tablet in his memory in the town and express their pride in their honored neighbor. How ludicrous it would be to say that Goodyear was lucky, or that or Wagner, Brahms, the Wright brothers, or Marconi were lucky. There is no finer example in American history than that of the belief of the Wright brothers that their destiny in life was to conquer air as a means of transportation for men. An age-old adage says, "You can no more do what you are trying to do than you can fly." You can no more do what you are trying to do than you can fly. The Wright brothers not only disproved this assumption, but did it under the most difficult circumstances. I believe it would be easier to secure capital today to build spaceships for interplanetary transportation than it was in their day to raise any money for so foolhardily an idea as to build ships for man to fly in the air. As they could raise no money, they earned the money in a little bicycle repair shop. With the greatest economy and patience, coupled with hard work and endurance born out of belief in their power to control their own destiny, the Wright brothers actually flew. Then one of the most thwarting things in human history happened. So strong was the belief that man could not fly that the official world denied that they flew for a long time after they had actually flown. When it was finally admitted that human beings could fly, millions of dollars could be raised more easily than tens could be raised before the fact was demonstrated. This fact was not of prime import in this story. What is of import is the fact that anyone who strongly believes in a heaven-born inspiration given to him as knowledge of his destiny can fulfill that destiny. In doing so, however, he must know that creation means the expression of energy in work. One must not only be willing to work, but love to work. Willingness is not enough. Willingness has some reservations in its connotation. The creative mind must have no reservations. Whatever hurdles he must confront, he must meet with joy and full knowledge that he can surmount them, and love the challenge of surmounting them. Those who do nothing because they cannot raise money to help them should realize that a very large percentage of the world's greatest men were born into poor families and had to work against terrific odds to get their first small start. They not only did not have money, they also did not have schooling. Many of them were also country boys who were raised in sparsely peopled back country and did not have even the possibilities for opportunity which cities held. Abraham Lincoln was one of these. When you see a barefoot country boy driving his cattle home from pasture, it is a far stretch of the imagination to think of that boy becoming able to transform world practice as Lincoln did. It is not safe to assume that he will not do so. However, for inklings of his destiny may have already whispered to his inner consciousness. So many country boys in this country and peasant boys in Europe have become world geniuses, inventors, or statesmen that it is safe to bow deeply before one out of the many with a feeling of certainty that he will make history someday. I gotta read that sentence over. So many country boys in this country and peasant boys in Europe have become world geniuses, inventors, or statesmen that it is safe to bow deeply before one out of the many with a feeling of certainty that he will make history someday. Every great man or woman who has ever lived was once an obscure child whom no one would pick out as a world figure. In the heart of one of the many of them was a clear picture of his destiny, and he could see himself in the mirror. From that moment on, he reached out for his destiny by taking one step at a time, until he reached its highest step. During that journey, he always met with tremendous... During that journey, he was always met with tremendous difficulties, but every man who knows his destiny knows that he will reach it. The only way that you can command your own destiny is to first vision it mentally. Fix my book here. Make as clear a picture of it in your mind as you can. Then take one little step at a time in unfolding it. Each step will give you a clearer picture of that destiny ahead and will bring you one step nearer to it. Never say, I cannot do it because I do not know how to do it. Start doing it and learn how to do it in the doing of it. Anyone knows how to take one step in the direction of his desire. When he takes that step, he can more clearly see his next step. Edison's little $3 battery was a first step toward his goal. He knew how to take that step, but he had to take it before he could know what the next step would be for him. You and I and everyone on earth are in that same position. We all had to start the same way. How many finished the race with honors in the dependent... How many finish the race with honors is dependent only upon themselves, and those who do win the race of life with honors win it only because they either intuitively feel or dynamically know that God is working with them as they work in harmony with Him. And we will be doing the conclusion. Chapter 19? XIX. I'm assuming that's 19. I'm a little rusty on my Roman numerals. Conclusion of God's message to woman. The whole journey of life is for the sole purpose of knowing God. Every moment of it, from your very beginning, God is working with you to inspire you with His ever-presence, which centers you in your soul. Man has heard God's silent voice within him for millions of years, but he did not know what it was. He called it instinct. He did not even know that instinct was not only God's voice within his soul, but it was also an electric beam which guided and controlled the unfolding of all God's creations. Consciousness dawned in man, and he began to think with God's mind. God's mind talks to man through his soul, but in his early beginnings he did not know that he thought with God's mind. For millions of years he had but sensed with his body. He sought sensations for his body. He sought survival for his body. Then, later, he sought possessions for his body. His entire sense of existence was through his body. He even sought happiness through his body, not knowing that the soul alone could know happiness and that it could never be found through sensation of body alone. Genius dawned in man. Then he knew the mind of man and the mind of God were one. When God then talked to man, he knew that God talked to him, and he then talked with God. When God talked to early man through instinct, he but commanded him. When God and cosmic genius man talked together through inspiration, God then communed with him. When man thus knew God and communed with him, God sent messages through him to other men who did not know him. That has been God's way since man's beginning through those who know God. He sends inspired messages to those who do not know him, to inspire them to know him. He first sends messages of his love in the rhythms of his love. Through his cosmic geniuses who know him, he slowly attunes the heartbeat of man's thinking to his mighty rhythms to draw men closer unto him. Beauty comes into the world through the heart of man, thus inspired with those mighty rhythms of God's universal thinking. The poets give God's messages to man, the builders of temples, and the inspired man of God who chisels the symmetry and balance of beauty into the white marble. These also give God's messages to man to bring him ever closer to knowing God within his own soul. The prophets who knew God told men of his love. God spoke to messengers like Buddha, Zoroaster, and Muhammad who knew his voice and the meaning of it. He gave messages to them for his people. God gave the same messages to all their peoples, but they did not know that God spoke to them. God speaks to all creatures of his creation, but they do not know that he speaks to them. Birds do not know how to build nests, or to fly south, or why. God shows them and directs their flights by polarity control. Spiders do not know how to build webs, nor to calculate their necessary stresses and strains. God works with them and tells them how. His presence centers the spider and ant to manifest his love with the same care that he gives to man. That is what is meant by God's omnipresence. God is everywhere, for mind is everywhere. Every particle of creating matter and every forming body are centered by the soul of mind from within to control it, and two so-called magnetic poles are extended from that center to guide and balance it, just as the center of gravity and the two poles of this earth balance and control its every movement and relationship to other planets. So is man centered and controlled. Man can defy that control if he desires to do so, but his defiance is costly to him in many ways. In animals, the elements of matter which living bodies are created from, there is no defiance of that law. Hence, nature is always in balance. We have heard much about revelations having been given to prophets and saints of olden days. God's revelations are just as much a part of today's communion between man and God as they ever were. God reveals himself to you and to all of us every moment of our lives. You suddenly know something which you did not know 1 minute before. It comes to you in a timeless flash. That is God telling you what you have desire to know. That desire to know is a wordless prayer, which you do not even know that you have uttered. But God knows your desire and extends the answer to you through his thinking. That is what revelations are. You are constantly being enriched by revelations from God. You may not know it yet. That is the slow process of your unfolding from your dark to his light. Aeons pass before men become aware of it. There are those, however, who have become aware of it, and they give their knowing of God's messages to man. When God revealed himself to Moses and told him to lead his people out of Egypt, he also revealed himself to all Moses' people. They did not know it, however, but Moses did, for Moses knew God's silent voice and fully comprehended its meaning. He, therefore, told those who did not know of God's voice and what had commanded them to do, and what God had commanded them to do. That is what is meant by being a messenger to man from God. There have been many messengers who have brought beauty and love to their fellow men, but as yet all too few have become aware of the mighty rhythms and whisperings of God's silent voice speaking to them from his kingdom of heaven within their soul. If you do not talk to God as you work with him, it is because you do not know that you can. That is the only reason. You can talk to God this moment if you will but believe you can and deeply desire to. He talks to you through your soul as he works with you to gradually awaken you to the light of his glorious presence. Why not desire to know God now as he works with you and you work with him to unfold your destiny? Some days you will become aware of that wonderful fact that you can talk to God as he has forever talked with you while he has been working with you. You will then work more intelligently with him when you know that you are working with him instead of not knowing it. That day must someday come to you. Why not begin now, knowing that he is awaiting that day when you will know that joy and ecstasy of his presence within you? That is what the words of the divine Iliad message means, which say, all men will come to me in due time, but theirs is the agony of awaiting. Such men as Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Leonardo, or Whitman knew that they could talk to God as he worked with them, and they brought rhythmic messages of beauty from God to man in a language which all men can comprehend within their very soul. The world of men can talk to God directly if they but know that they can. They do not need Brahms or Beethoven to act as interpreter for them when they know that all of God's omniscient thinking is theirs when they will but tune in with it, as Brahms and Beethoven did. Omniscience is universal. Each man can know all things which he desires to know. Each man can know all things when he desires to know all things. Deep within my consciousness, I have known my destiny since childhood. I cannot remember a time that I did not talk to God, for he was the first one I told my thoughts to, and later took my human problems to. God has always been more real to me than any human being could possibly be. Seeing such unhappiness in the world gave birth within me to a deep desire to share the knowledge of God's great love and direction with others, and so it was that God commanded me to give this message to you. Likewise, all women desire to give love. I know there have been many down through the ages who have faintly heard God's whispering command to them to take their place as the world mother. This book is God's message to you. God has told you what you should do to save this civilization and cause it to endure. I can but do as I am commanded, for which every moment of my life is dedicated. I cannot execute the command alone. The mothers of the world can bring order out of chaos, unity out of disunity, and love out of fear, if they will but take the empty seat beside the Father of the world home to give it a mother's love. I will close this message as I opened it to tell you that the 11th hour is here. You cannot wait, lest the world perish. You must unite now by multiplying the power of your voice by millions before the next election. Chapter 12 has outlined that plan. Further details will follow at the end of this chapter. I will say to you, however, that when God plainly tells his children what to do, excuse me, I will say to you, however, that when God plainly tells his children what to do to work with him to unfold his children's destiny, he will work with them to unfold it. Mankind desires peace and love and romance and beauty, and all peoples of the world desire joy in their hearts and the singing of hosannas in their homes. The world can have its desire fulfilled when it works with God, but not while it works against him. God made fathers and mothers in equally divided pairs, in order that they could unite as equal pairs. God intended the male aggressiveness and progressive qualities which construct the world home should be balanced by the female qualities which give cohesiveness of love to the world home. Man has forever been taking life. Woman has forever been giving life. The world family home can endure only by balancing the male-female qualities. God's silent voice has forever been telling the fathers and mothers of the world that peace, happiness, romance, and beauty can come only through their unity. There has never been unity between the fathers and mothers of the world, however. The world's desire for happiness can never be fulfilled until balance between the two equally divided mate parts makes their desired unity possible. If the mothers of the world will but obey God's voice, and if the fathers of the world will but open their hearts to the balance of unity in the world father-motherhood, the peace which passeth all understanding will come to pass. And that is our ending. Yeah. Indeed. What a lovely, lovely tidbit of wisdom.